James Edward stood at the tall windows of his London apartment, watching the morning mist rise from the Thames. At 38, he had grown accustomed to the peculiar weight that came with being born into royalty yet living in its shadows. The newspapers scattered across his coffee table bore headlines about his cousin William's latest charity work and his father's upcoming coronation events, but none mentioned James of Wessex. He had learned long ago that being 15th in line to the throne meant existing in a strange limbo between ordinary life and royal duty. The apartment itself reflected this contradiction. Expensive furnishings mixed with personal touches that spoke of a man trying to forge his own identity. Family photographs lined the mantelpiece, but they were carefully arranged to avoid the formal portraits that dominated other royal residences. James preferred the candid shots, his sister Louise laughing at a family barbecue, his parents sharing a quiet moment in their garden, himself as a child building sandcastles with his grandfather Philip. His phone buzzed against the marble countertop. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and James felt the familiar flutter of nervousness that had plagued him for months. They had been together for 3 years, and the conversation they kept postponing hung between them like morning fog. She wanted certainty about their future, about whether he would ever be free to live the life of a normal man. The question haunted him because he didn't have an answer. "Good morning," her voice carried that careful tone she had adopted recently, the one that suggested she was measuring each word before speaking. "Morning, love. Sleep well?" James turned away from the window, settling into the leather chair that had belonged to his grandfather. "James, we need to talk. Really talk. Not the surface conversations we've been having lately." Sarah's directness had always been what drew him to her. Unlike the calculated speech of court life, she spoke with honest emotion. He closed his eyes, knowing this moment had been inevitable. "I know we do. I've been thinking about everything you said last week." "Have you?" "Because it feels like you're still waiting for something to change, for some sign from the universe about what you're supposed to do with your life." Her frustration was palpable even through the phone. "I love you, James, but I can't keep living in this uncertainty. I need to know if you're ever going to choose us over duty." The word duty landed heavily between them. James had never asked for the responsibilities that came with his birth, but they had shaped every decision he had ever made. When he chose his university course, when he decided on his career, even when he selected this apartment, the weight of royal expectations influenced everything. Yet he had never been given a clear role, never told exactly what was expected of him beyond vague notions of service and discretion. "Sarah, you know it's not that simple. I can't just walk away from who I am." "But who are you, really? You're not the heir, you're not even close to the throne anymore. You work a normal job, you live in a normal flat, you have normal friends. The only thing that's not normal is your refusal to commit to the life you're actually living." James stood and walked to his desk, where an ornate invitation lay unopened. It bore the royal seal and had arrived yesterday evening by special courier. He had been avoiding it, sensing that whatever lay inside would complicate his already turbulent thoughts. "There's something I haven't told you," he said quietly. "I received an invitation yesterday. From Uncle Charles. It's marked as urgent and personal." The silence stretched between them. Sarah knew, as he did, that personal communications from the king were never casual matters. "You haven't opened it?" "No. I suppose I'm afraid of what it might say. What it might ask of me." "James, you can't live your life afraid of envelopes. Open it. Whatever it says, we'll figure out how to deal with it together." Her use of "we" gave him hope, though he heard the fragility in her voice. He knew she was offering one final chance for him to choose their relationship over the endless uncertainty of his royal position. With trembling fingers, James broke the wax seal. The heavy paper crackled as he unfolded it. The message was brief, written in the king's own hand rather than dictated to a secretary. This personal touch made the content even more significant. "My dear James," the letter began, "I hope this finds you well. I have been giving considerable thought to the matter we discussed at Christmas regarding your position within the family and your desire to find meaningful service. I believe the time has come for a conversation about your future role. Would you be so kind as to join me for dinner tomorrow evening at 8? This is not a formal summons but a request from your uncle who values your input on important family matters. There are developments I wish to discuss with you privately. With warmth and affection, Charles R. James read the letter twice, his heart rate increasing with each word. The Christmas conversation Charles referenced had been brief but significant. James had expressed his frustration with existing in royal limbo, his desire to either be given meaningful responsibility or the freedom to step away entirely. Charles had listened thoughtfully but had made no commitments. Now, months later, the king was reaching out. What does it say? Sarah's voice brought him back to the present moment. James read the letter aloud, his voice growing steadier as he spoke. When he finished, silence filled the line again. This could be good news, couldn't it? Maybe he's finally going to give you a real role, something that makes sense of all this waiting. Or maybe he's going to ask me to step back entirely, to remove myself from public duties altogether. James had considered this possibility often. As the family line grew and new generations took precedence, there might be a push to streamline the monarchy, to reduce the number of working royals. Would that be so terrible? If he gave you permission to live a normal life? The question struck him deeply. Would it be terrible? He had spent so many years feeling caught between worlds that he had never seriously considered what complete freedom might look like. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. I don't know, he admitted. This life, this identity, it's all I've ever known. Even if it's frustrating, even if it's lonely sometimes, it's still who I am. No, James. It's not who you are. It's what you were born into. There's a difference. Her words echoed in the apartment long after they said goodbye. James spent the rest of the day walking through London, observing the ordinary lives of ordinary people. He watched couples holding hands without worrying about photographers, families enjoying simple meals without considering protocol, individuals making decisions based purely on personal desire rather than public expectation. As evening approached, he found himself in Hyde Park, sitting on the same bench where his grandfather used to bring him as a child. Philip had been the one member of the family who understood the burden of marrying into royalty, of having to forge an identity within an ancient institution. He had often spoken to James about the importance of finding purpose, not just accepting whatever role was assigned. The monarchy will survive because it adapts, Philip had told him once. But individuals within it must also adapt, must find ways to serve that make sense for their time and their talents. Your challenge, my boy, will be to discover what form your service should take. Now, sitting alone as darkness fell over the park, James realized tomorrow's dinner might finally provide the answer to that challenge. But it might also force him to make the choice Sarah had been pushing him toward, between duty and personal happiness, between the life he had always known and the life he might dare to claim. He thought about the ring hidden in his desk drawer at home, the one he had bought months ago but never found the courage to present. Sarah deserved certainty, deserved a man who could commit fully to building a life with her. But how could he make such a commitment when he didn't even understand what his own life was supposed to become? The city lights began to twinkle around him as James finally stood to head home. Tomorrow evening, he would sit across from the king and learn what the future might hold. Whatever Charles had to say would change everything, he was certain of that much. The only question was whether the change would bring clarity or create even deeper confusion. As he walked through the quiet streets, James allowed himself to imagine different scenarios. Perhaps Charles would offer him a significant role, something that would give meaning to all his years of preparation and waiting. Or perhaps the king would release him from all obligations, freeing him to pursue the normal life Sarah craved. Either outcome would require courage he wasn't sure he possessed. The apartment felt different when he returned, as if the unopened invitation had somehow changed the very air inside. James poured himself a glass of wine and stood again at the windows, looking out at the Thames. Somewhere in the distance, the lights of Buckingham Palace glowed softly in the darkness. Tomorrow evening, he would enter those familiar rooms not as the dutiful nephew fulfilling social obligations, but as a man seeking answers about his destiny. The weight of waiting, which had pressed upon him for so many years, suddenly felt different. Instead of the crushing uncertainty that had defined his adult life, James felt something new stirring within him: anticipation. Whatever tomorrow brought, it would at least bring movement, change, a step forward into whatever his life was meant to become. He raised his glass toward the distant palace lights, a private toast to the unknown future that awaited him. For the first time in years, James Edward felt ready to embrace whatever role fate and family had in store for him. The next evening arrived with unseasonable rain that drummed against the windows of Buckingham Palace. James adjusted his tie for the third time as he waited in the green drawing room, surrounded by portraits of ancestors who seemed to watch him with knowing eyes. The familiar scent of beeswax and old wood filled the air, triggering memories of childhood visits when these same rooms had seemed impossibly grand. Now they felt intimate, almost cozy, despite their magnificent scale. A soft knock interrupted his nervous fidgeting. Private Secretary Sir Clive Alderton entered with his characteristic quiet efficiency. "His Majesty will see you now, sir. He's waiting in the oak room." James followed the familiar corridors, their walls lined with centuries of royal history. Paintings depicting great moments of the monarchy reminded him of the weight of tradition that surrounded every decision made within these walls. Tonight, he sensed, would add another layer to that history, though he couldn't yet understand how. King Charles stood when James entered, immediately crossing the room to embrace his nephew. The gesture was warm and genuine, lacking any trace of formal protocol. "James, my dear boy, thank you for coming on such short notice. You look well, though I detect a certain tension about your shoulders." The oak room had been chosen deliberately, James realized. Unlike the grand staterooms where official business was conducted, this space felt personal. Family photographs were scattered among the antique furniture, and a fire crackled in the hearth despite the season. Charles had removed his jacket and loosened his tie, creating an atmosphere that invited honest conversation. "Please, sit. I've taken the liberty of ordering your favorite wine. The Bordeaux from that little vineyard we visited during your gap year." Charles poured 2 glasses with careful attention. "I remember how much you enjoyed that trip to France. You were so curious about everything, asking endless questions about the local history, the winemaking process, the lives of the people we met." James accepted the wine gratefully, using the familiar taste to steady his nerves. "I've been thinking about that trip recently. It was one of the few times I felt completely free to be myself, to explore and learn without worrying about expectations or protocols. Precisely why I arranged it. Every young person in our family needs time to discover who they are beyond the titles and duties. Your father understood this deeply, which is why he encouraged you to take that unconventional path after university." Charles settled into his chair, studying his nephew's face with the careful attention he gave to important state documents. The mention of his father brought a familiar ache to James's chest. Prince Edward had been the one member of the family who truly understood the challenge of finding purpose in the shadow of the throne. He had forged his own path in media and entertainment, accepting both criticism and support with equal grace. His sudden death 3 years ago had left James feeling more lost than ever. "I miss his guidance," James admitted. "He always knew how to balance duty with personal fulfillment. I feel like I've been stumbling in the dark ever since. Your father would be very proud of the man you've become. He worried, about the particular challenges you would face. Being far enough from the throne to crave normalcy, yet close enough to never escape the obligations entirely." Charles paused, swirling his wine thoughtfully. "He made me promise to watch over your journey, to help you find your proper place when the time was right." James felt his pulse quicken. "Uncle Charles, what exactly are we discussing tonight? Your letter suggested there were developments, important matters to address." The king set down his glass and leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "James, I want to speak frankly about your position within the family and the monarchy's future. When I assumed the throne, I inherited not just the crown but the responsibility to modernize our institution while preserving its essential character. This requires difficult decisions about roles, titles, and the shape of our family's public service." A chill ran through James despite the warmth of the fire. This sounded like the beginning of a conversation about stepping back, about being gently removed from royal duties. He had prepared himself for this possibility, but facing it directly felt more devastating than he had expected. I understand if you feel the need to streamline the family's public role. The press has certainly questioned the relevance of extended royal duties in modern times. James tried to keep his voice steady, professional. Charles raised a hand, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. My dear nephew, I think you've misunderstood the direction of this conversation. I'm not here to diminish your role but to enhance it, to finally give you the meaningful service you've been seeking. The words hit James like a physical force. He set down his wine glass, afraid his shaking hands might betray his emotional state. I'm sorry, what exactly are you saying? I'm saying that I have been watching your work, your character, your commitment to causes that matter. Your environmental advocacy, your support for veterans' mental health initiatives, your quiet but significant charitable work. You've been preparing for greater responsibility whether you realized it or not. Charles stood and walked to a side table where several documents lay waiting. The Duchy of Wessex has been without an active duke since your great-uncle's death. The title has remained vacant not due to oversight but because I was waiting for the right moment, the right person to revitalize its purpose for the modern era. Charles returned with an ornate document that James recognized as formal royal letters patent. I want to offer you the opportunity to become the Duke of Wessex, with all the responsibilities and privileges that entail. James felt the room spin slightly. The Duchy of Wessex was one of the most ancient titles in the British aristocracy, with lands and responsibilities spanning several counties. It wasn't merely an honorary position but an active role that would require dedication, leadership, and a complete transformation of his current life. Uncle Charles, I don't know what to say. This is far beyond anything I imagined when I came here tonight. James's voice came out as barely a whisper. Are you certain? The duchy requires someone with experience in land management, agricultural policy, local governance. I'm not sure I'm qualified for such responsibility. Qualification isn't just about technical knowledge, James. It's about character, commitment, and the ability to grow into a role. Your father possessed these qualities when he took on his earl's responsibilities, and I see them strongly in you. Charles returned to his seat, his expression both serious and encouraging. The duchy needs modernization, needs someone who understands both tradition and innovation. Your background in sustainable development, your genuine interest in community welfare, these are exactly what Wessex requires. James thought about the implications cascading through his mind. Accepting the duchy would mean leaving London, moving to Wessex, taking on responsibilities for thousands of tenants and employees. It would mean stepping fully into royal duty rather than hovering at its edges. But it would also mean having a clear purpose, a defined role that could give meaning to years of preparation and waiting. What about Sarah? The question escaped before he could stop it, revealing how deeply personal considerations were intertwined with this royal opportunity. Charles's expression softened. Ah yes, Sarah Mitchell. The documentary filmmaker you've been seeing. I understand she's a remarkable woman with strong opinions about royal life and its constraints. James felt heat rise to his cheeks, embarrassed that his personal life was so transparent to his uncle. She's been questioning whether I'll ever be able to commit to a normal relationship while carrying these royal obligations. This opportunity, as incredible as it is, would hardly reassure her about our future together. Perhaps, Charles said carefully, the question isn't whether you can have a normal relationship within royal life, but whether you can have an authentic one. Sarah fell in love with you, not with your title or lack thereof. If you become Duke of Wessex, you would have a clear identity, a defined purpose. Sometimes uncertainty is more challenging than responsibility. The observation struck James as profoundly true. His relationship with Sarah had been strained not by specific royal duties but by his own inability to define what his life was supposed to become. Constant uncertainty about his role had made it impossible for him to plan a future with anyone. How long do I have to consider this? James asked, though part of him already knew his answer. The opportunity felt like what he had been unconsciously preparing for his entire life. Take whatever time you need, but not too long. The duchy has been without active leadership for 18 months. The tenants, the land, the local communities, they all need someone who can commit fully to their welfare. Charles picked up another document from the side table. I've prepared a detailed briefing about the current state of the duchy, its challenges and opportunities. I think you'll find it fascinating rather than daunting. James accepted the thick folder with reverent care. Inside, he knew, lay the blueprints for a completely different life. The weight of it in his hands felt significant, as if he were holding his own future. There's one more thing, Charles continued, his tone becoming even more personal. Your grandmother, before she passed, spoke often about you and your potential. She believed you had the temperament and intelligence to serve the monarchy in ways that would honor both tradition and progress. This duchy appointment would fulfill her vision for your role in our family's future. The mention of his grandmother brought tears to James's eyes. Elizabeth had been the one constant source of encouragement throughout his childhood and young adulthood, always believing in his capabilities even when he doubted them himself. Knowing that this opportunity aligned with her hopes for him made the decision feel less like a burden and more like a destiny. Uncle Charles, I'm deeply honored by your faith in me. I know accepting this role would change everything about my life, and I don't take that lightly. But I also know that I've been waiting my entire adult life for the chance to serve meaningfully, to use whatever talents I have for something larger than myself. Charles smiled broadly for the first time that evening. I hoped you would see it that way. You have your father's sense of duty combined with your mother's practical intelligence. The duchy would benefit enormously from your leadership. As the evening progressed, they discussed the practical aspects of the transition. James would need to spend several months learning about estate management, agricultural policy, and local governance before officially taking on the role. There would be a formal investiture ceremony, probably in the autumn, where he would receive the title and take his oath of service to the duchy and crown. When James finally left the palace near midnight, his mind was racing with possibilities and challenges. The rain had stopped, and stars were visible through the breaking clouds. The documents tucked under his arm felt heavier than their physical weight suggested, carrying as they did the blueprint for his entire future. Walking through the quiet streets toward his apartment, James realized that everything Sarah had said about choosing between duty and personal happiness had been based on a false premise. The choice wasn't between royal obligation and authentic living, it was between purposeless drift and meaningful service. Tomorrow, he would call Sarah and share this incredible news. Perhaps, with a clear role and defined purpose, he could finally offer her the certainty she deserved about their future together. Sarah's coffee had grown cold as she listened to James recount every detail of his evening with the king. They sat in her small kitchen in Notting Hill, the morning light streaming through windows that overlooked a garden she had lovingly tended for 3 years. The domestic tranquility of her home felt surreal against the magnitude of what James was describing. So you would become an actual duke. Not just a ceremonial title, but a working duke with real responsibilities. Her voice carried a mixture of awe and something else James couldn't quite identify. Fear, perhaps. Or resignation. The Duke of Wessex, yes. Uncle Charles made it clear this isn't just an honorary position. The duchy spans 3 counties, includes working farms, historic properties, and communities that have been connected to the title for centuries. It would be a complete life change. James watched Sarah's face carefully, searching for clues about her reaction. She stood abruptly and moved to the window, her back to him as she processed the information. This is what you've been waiting for, isn't it? Your whole life, you've been preparing for something exactly like this. I think so, yes. But, Sarah, this doesn't have to change things between us. Dukes can marry, can have families. The role comes with houses, with stability. We could build a wonderful life together in Wessex. Sarah turned around, and James saw tears glistening in her eyes. James, do you hear yourself? You're talking about us building a life as if I'm just another consideration to factor into your ducal planning. As if becoming a duchess is obviously something I would want. The words stung because they contained an uncomfortable truth. In his excitement about finally having a clear path forward, James had assumed Sarah would naturally want to join him on that journey. He hadn't considered that accepting the duchy might actually push her further away. "I'm sorry, that's not how I meant it. I just thought, finally, having certainty, having a defined role, would solve the problems we've been facing." "The problems we've been facing aren't about uncertainty, James. They're about the fact that you've never once asked me what I want from life, what my dreams and ambitions are. You've been so focused on finding your place in the royal family that you've forgotten I exist as an independent person with my own hopes for the future." Sarah moved to the kitchen counter, gripping its edge as if anchoring herself. "I'm 35 years old. I've built a career I love, making documentaries about social justice issues. I have friends, community commitments, projects that matter to me. The life you're describing would require me to abandon all of that to become some sort of duchess consort, attending charity galas and opening village fetes." James felt his carefully constructed vision of their future beginning to crumble. "But, you could continue your work. Documentaries about rural issues, social problems in farming communities. The duchy platform could amplify your voice, give you access to stories you've never been able to tell. Under royal supervision? With palace handlers managing every project, every interview, every creative decision? James, you know how this system works. I would become Lady Sarah, the Duke's wife who makes tasteful documentaries about approved subjects. Everything I've worked for would be filtered through royal protocols and public relations concerns." The truth of her words settled heavily between them. James had seen how other royal spouses struggled to maintain their professional identities within the constraints of royal life. Even the most independent-minded among them eventually found their careers shaped by palace considerations rather than personal passion. "There has to be a way to make it work," James said, though his voice lacked conviction. "People find ways to balance royal duty with authentic living." "Do they? Really? Name one royal spouse who has maintained complete creative independence. Name one who makes decisions purely based on personal conviction rather than what's best for the monarchy." Sarah's challenge hung in the air between them. James opened his mouth to respond but found he couldn't. Every example he considered proved Sarah's point. Even the most admirable royal spouses had learned to modulate their voices, to consider royal reputation before personal expression. "I love you, James. I truly do. But I can't become someone else, can't sacrifice everything I've built, just to fit into your newly discovered destiny." Sarah returned to the table, reaching across to touch his hand. "And I don't think you should expect me to. So what are you saying? That this is the end for us?" "I'm saying that for the first time since we started dating, you have a clear choice to make. You can accept this duchy and become the man your family wants you to be, or you can choose the life we could build together as equals, as partners who support each other's dreams rather than one person sacrificing for the other's destiny." The weight of her ultimatum pressed down on James like physical force. For 3 years, he had been the one asking Sarah to wait, to accept uncertainty about their future. Now she was asking him to choose between the royal purpose he had always craved and the personal happiness he had found with her. "That's not fair, Sarah. You know how important this is to me, how long I've been searching for meaningful service. And you know how important my independence is to me, how hard I've worked to build a career that makes a difference. Why is your calling more valuable than mine? Why should I be the one to compromise everything?" James stood and paced to the window, looking out at Sarah's garden. She had planted it herself when she first moved to this house, choosing each flower and herb with careful attention to what would thrive in London's climate. The garden represented everything he loved about her, her independence, her creativity, her ability to nurture beautiful things through patient attention. "I don't know how to answer that question," he admitted. "Part of me has always believed that royal duty, service to the nation, was inherently more important than individual desires. But, listening to you now, I realize how arrogant that sounds." "It's not arrogant, James. It's just incomplete. Service to others is noble, but it shouldn't require the complete sacrifice of everyone who loves you. Real partnership means finding ways for both people to grow and contribute, not one person becoming a supporting character in the other's story." James turned back to face her, seeing clearly for the first time how their relationship had always been unbalanced. Sarah had accommodated his royal complications, his uncertainty about the future, his inability to make concrete plans. She had been patient and supportive while her own dreams remained secondary to his search for purpose. I'd been selfish, haven't I? All this time, I'd been so focused on my own confusion about my role that I never really considered what you needed from our relationship. Not selfish, exactly. But definitely self-absorbed. You've been trying so hard to figure out who you're supposed to be that you forgot to notice who I actually am. Sarah's voice carried sadness rather than anger. I fell in love with a man who seemed thoughtful and introspective, who cared about making a positive impact on the world. But, somewhere along the way, that man got lost in royal protocols and family expectations. James felt something shift inside him as he processed her words. The duchy opportunity, as magnificent as it was, represented more of the same pattern that had defined his entire life, accepting a role defined by others rather than choosing his own path based on his true values and desires. What if I said no to the duchy? What if I told Uncle Charles that I wanted to step back from royal duties entirely, to build a life based on what I actually want rather than what's expected of me? Sarah's eyes widened with surprise. Could you really do that? After waiting so long for meaningful royal service, could you walk away from such an incredible opportunity? I don't know. But I'm starting to think that meaningful service doesn't have to come through royal title. There are other ways to make a difference, other platforms for positive impact. James returned to his seat, taking both of Sarah's hands in his. What if we created something together? Your documentary skills combined with my connections and resources could tackle issues we both care about. For the first time that morning, Sarah smiled genuinely. That's the first time you've talked about we as equal partners rather than asking me to fit into your predetermined life. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand. I've been so focused on finding my place in the royal family that I lost sight of what actually matters to me, using whatever advantages I have to help others, building a life with someone I love, creating something authentic rather than just fulfilling inherited expectations. Sarah studied his face carefully, as if trying to determine whether this revelation was genuine or simply another attempt to avoid losing her. James, this is a huge decision. The duchy isn't just a job opportunity, it's your family's legacy, your heritage. Are you really prepared to walk away from all of that? I think I am. Or at least, I think I need to be. This conversation has made me realize that I've never made a truly independent choice about my life. Every major decision has been filtered through family expectations or royal protocols. Maybe it's time I figured out who I am when I strip away all of those external pressures. James felt a strange lightness as he spoke, as if admitting this truth had physically removed weight from his shoulders. The duchy remained an incredible honor, but it also represented another form of the golden cage he had inhabited his entire life. If you're serious about this, if you really want to explore building something together as equal partners, then I'm willing to see where that leads us. Sarah's voice carried cautious hope. But, James, this can't be another way of postponing real commitment. If we're going to build a life together, it has to be based on genuine choice, not fear of losing royal status or disappointing family members. I understand. And I want you to know that whatever I decide about the duchy, it won't be based on keeping or losing you. It needs to be based on what kind of life I actually want to live, what kind of person I want to become. James squeezed her hands gently. For the first time in my adult life, I feel like I have the chance to make that choice authentically. As the morning sunlight grew stronger, flooding Sarah's kitchen with warmth, James felt himself standing at the threshold of a completely different future than any he had previously imagined. The duchy still called to him, representing everything he had been raised to value about service and duty. But, sitting across from Sarah, seeing the hope and determination in her eyes, he began to understand that there might be other forms of meaningful life waiting to be discovered. The choice before him was more complex than simply accepting or declining a title. It was about deciding what kind of man he wanted to become, what kind of relationship he wanted to build, and what kind of impact he wanted to make on the world. For the first time, those decisions felt entirely his own to make. 3 weeks after his conversation with Sarah, James stood once again in the Oak Room at Buckingham Palace, but this time the atmosphere felt entirely different. King Charles waited with visible tension, perhaps sensing that his nephew had not spent the intervening weeks simply planning his transition to ducal duties. The same fire crackled in the hearth, the same family photographs smiled from their frames, but James felt like a fundamentally changed person occupying the same space. "Uncle Charles, thank you for seeing me again so soon. I know you're incredibly busy with state matters, and I appreciate you making time for what I know will be a difficult conversation." Charles gestured toward the familiar chairs, but his movements carried a careful formality that hadn't been present during their previous meeting. "I must admit, James, your urgent request for this meeting has left me somewhat concerned. I hope you haven't discovered any problems with the duchy that weren't addressed in the briefing materials." "No, sir, the duchy information was comprehensive and thoughtful. If anything, it reinforced how significant this opportunity is, how much responsibility and honor comes with the title." James settled into his chair, the weight of his decision settling around him like armor. "Which makes what I need to tell you even more difficult." A flicker of understanding crossed Charles's face, followed quickly by disappointment. "I see. You've decided to decline the position." "Yes, sir. After extensive consideration and honest examination of what I truly want from my life, I've concluded that accepting the Duchy of Wessex would not be the right path for me." James had practiced these words, but speaking them aloud to the king felt monumental. Charles leaned back in his chair, his expression cycling through surprise, disappointment, and what James hoped was eventually understanding. "May I ask what factors influenced this decision?" "I thought the duchy aligned perfectly with your interests and capabilities." "It does, in many ways. The agricultural sustainability work, the community development opportunities, the chance to modernize historic estates while preserving their character. All of that appeals to me deeply." James paused, gathering courage for the more personal aspects of his reasoning. "But, Uncle Charles, I realized that accepting the duchy would mean continuing a pattern that has defined my entire life, allowing my path to be determined by family expectations rather than personal choice. Personal choice is a luxury that comes with privilege, James. Those of us born into this family have responsibilities that transcend individual preferences. Your father understood this deeply." Charles's voice carried the weight of decades spent balancing personal desires against royal duty. "I know he did, and I have enormous respect for the choices Dad made. But I also remember conversations where he admitted struggling with the constraints, wondering what his life might have looked like if he had been born into different circumstances." James leaned forward, hoping to convey the sincerity of his reflection. "I don't think service to others requires sacrificing authentic self-determination. There have to be ways to contribute meaningfully to society while also honoring personal convictions about how that contribution should take shape." Charles studied his nephew's face intently. "This decision involves Sarah Mitchell, doesn't it? The documentary filmmaker who has strong opinions about royal life. Sarah has been honest about her inability to thrive within royal constraints, yes. But, Uncle Charles, this decision isn't about choosing her over duty. It's about choosing a form of service that aligns with who I actually am rather than who I'm supposed to become." James felt the importance of making this distinction clear. "If I accepted the duchy to please the family while resenting the choice, I wouldn't serve the people of Wessex well. They deserve someone who embraces the role wholeheartedly." "And you believe you can serve the greater good more effectively outside the formal structure of the monarchy?" "I believe I can serve more authentically, which might ultimately be more effective, yes. Sarah and I have been discussing ways to combine our skills and resources for documentary work focused on social justice issues. Environmental protection, veterans' mental health support, rural poverty. These are causes I care about deeply, and I could approach them without the political constraints that would come with royal representation." Charles stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture James recognized from countless state occasions. When the king spoke, his voice carried both sadness and grudging respect. "Your grandmother would have mixed feelings about this decision. She valued duty above almost everything else, but she also believed in the importance of adapting royal service to changing times. I hope she would understand that I'm not rejecting service, just choosing a different form of it." The documentary work Sarah and I are planning could reach audiences and address issues that formal royal duties might not touch as effectively. And what of your titles, your position in the line of succession? These are not simply decorations to be discarded when they become inconvenient. James had anticipated this question and spent considerable time researching precedents. I would like to retain my current position but step back from active royal duties, similar to the path Princess Margaret's children chose. I understand this might disappoint some family members, but I hope it can be done with grace and mutual respect. Charles turned from the window, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. You realize this decision will generate significant media attention. The press will speculate about family discord, about the monarchy's ability to retain the loyalty of younger generations. I do understand that, and I've prepared a statement emphasizing my continued respect for the institution and my gratitude for the opportunities I've been given. I want to make it clear that this is about personal calling rather than criticism of royal service. James had indeed spent hours crafting language that would protect both his own integrity and the family's reputation. Show me this statement. James reached into his jacket and withdrew a carefully typed document. Charles read it slowly, his expression revealing nothing about his reaction to the contents. When he finished, he set the paper on the side table and returned to his chair. This is well written and respectful. I appreciate your consideration for the family's position. Charles paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. James, I want you to understand that this door doesn't close permanently. The duchy could remain available to you in the future, should circumstances change or should you reconsider your path. The generosity of this offer surprised James, who had expected anger or disappointment rather than understanding. Thank you, Uncle Charles. That means more to me than you know. I hope that someday, the work Sarah and I do will reflect well on the values you and the family represent, even if it takes a different form than traditional royal service. Perhaps it will. The monarchy has survived for centuries because it has learned to adapt, to encompass different forms of service and different expressions of duty. Your path may become an example for future generations of how to serve meaningfully while maintaining personal authenticity. Charles stood, signaling the formal end of their conversation. But, instead of the distant handshake James expected, the king embraced him warmly. Your father would be proud of your thoughtfulness, even if he might question your decision. You've approached this choice with maturity and consideration for all involved. That means everything to me, Uncle Charles. I hope I can continue to earn that respect through the choices I make going forward. As James left Buckingham Palace for what he knew would be the last time as someone expected to fulfill royal duties, he felt a mixture of relief and loss that was difficult to process. The weight of family expectations that had pressed upon him for 38 years was finally lifting, but it left behind an emptiness that would take time to fill with new purpose. Walking through central London toward Sarah's house, James noticed details he had missed during countless previous journeys through these streets. Street musicians performing for small crowds, elderly couples sharing benches in quiet squares, young mothers pushing prams while talking animatedly on phones. These were the lives he had observed from the margins of royal responsibility. Now he would have the opportunity to move among them as an equal rather than a representative of distant authority. Sarah was waiting in her garden when he arrived, tending to the herb plants she had recently added to her collection. She looked up as the gate clicked closed behind him, her expression a mixture of hope and concern. How did it go? Better than I expected and harder than I imagined, James replied, settling onto the wooden bench she had built herself the previous summer. Uncle Charles was disappointed but ultimately understanding. He even suggested the decision might represent an evolution in how the royal family approaches service. And how do you feel? Now that it's real, now that you've actually walked away from everything you were raised to value? James considered the question carefully, examining the complex emotions that had been churning within him since leaving the palace. Terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. For the first time in my life, I have no predetermined path, no family expectations to fulfill, no role assigned by birth rather than choice. It's liberating and absolutely overwhelming. Sarah moved to sit beside him on the bench, taking his hand in hers. We don't have to figure out everything immediately. We can take time to explore what kind of work feels meaningful to both of us, what kind of life we want to build together. Together, James repeated, savoring the word. I don't think I ever really understood what that meant before. I was always so focused on individual duty, individual service, that I never considered the power of genuine partnership. So what happens now? Practically speaking, I mean. Do you have to make some sort of formal announcement about stepping back from royal duties? James nodded, withdrawing the statement he had prepared from his jacket pocket. I'll release this to the press tomorrow, after the family has had time to prepare their own response. It emphasizes respect for the institution while explaining my personal choice to pursue different forms of service. Sarah read the statement carefully, occasionally nodding with approval. This is beautifully written, James. It's honest about your decision while protecting everyone's dignity. Your uncle was right to approve this approach. The real work starts now, though. Figuring out how to create meaningful impact without the platform of royal status, learning to navigate the world as James Edward rather than James of Wessex. James felt both excitement and uncertainty about the challenges ahead. I'll need to develop new skills, new networks, new ways of understanding how to contribute effectively to causes I care about. We'll figure it out together. And, James, I want you to know how much I admire the courage this decision required. Walking away from everything you were raised to embrace, choosing uncertainty over security, that takes incredible strength. As the afternoon sun filtered through the leaves of Sarah's carefully tended garden, James felt a sense of possibility that had been absent from his life for years. The future stretched ahead of them with no predetermined shape, no assigned roles, no external expectations beyond those they would choose for themselves. 3 months later, James and Sarah's first collaborative documentary premiered at a small film festival in Edinburgh. The project explored the intersection of climate change and rural mental health, combining James's environmental knowledge with Sarah's storytelling expertise and commitment to social justice. The film was modest in scope but powerful in impact, earning praise for its authentic portrayal of farming families struggling with unprecedented environmental challenges. Standing together at the premiere, watching an audience respond emotionally to their work, James felt a fulfillment that was entirely different from anything he had experienced during years of royal duties. This satisfaction came from having created something meaningful through genuine collaboration, from having contributed to important conversations without the filter of royal protocol or political constraint. No regrets? Sarah whispered as the credits rolled and applause filled the small theater. James looked around at the faces in the audience, many of them moved to tears by the stories they had just witnessed. These were people whose lives might be genuinely affected by the awareness their documentary could raise, whose struggles had been honored through careful, respectful storytelling. This was service, but service chosen rather than inherited, service that honored his authentic self while contributing meaningfully to others' welfare. None at all, he replied, meaning it completely. This feels like who I was always meant to become. In choosing love over duty, authenticity over expectation, James had discovered that the most meaningful service often emerges when individuals have the freedom to contribute their genuine talents and passions to causes they care deeply about. The crown he had inherited through birth paled in comparison to the crown of choice he had learned to wear with pride and purpose.